Welcome in, everybody. Ready for a deep dive into the world of behavioral economics. It's going to be a fascinating look at how our minds work when we make decisions, especially about money, right?
Absolutely. It really challenges those traditional economic models that say we're all perfectly rational all the time.
Yeah, no kidding. We all know we don't always make the most logical choices, right?
Exactly. Behavioral economics digs into those less than perfect decisions. All those emotions, biases, even just what everybody else is doing, it all comes into play.
So are we just irrational all the time?
Not exactly. One of the biggest names in the field is Richard Thaler. And he basically showed that, yeah, we're not always perfectly rational, but the interesting thing is we're irrational in predictable ways.
Interesting. And I guess that's kind of a tough pill to swallow for traditional economists, huh?
You could say that. Thaler actually faced tons of pushback when he started introducing these behavioral concepts.
Well, yeah. Imagine walking into a room full of people who are all about logic and numbers and saying, hey, guess what? Humans aren't always logical.
He pretty much did just that. I mean, he even jokes about it in his speeches. He talks about the difference between the perfectly rational econs you see in economic models.
Econs, I love that.
Right. So he compares these theoretical econs to us messy, emotional humans in the real world.
So what was the biggest hurdle he faced?
It was something called the as-if argument. Basically, traditional economists would say, okay, sure, maybe people aren't doing complex calculations in their heads for every little choice.
But they're still acting as if they are, right?
Exactly. It's like that classic example of the billiards player. They might not be using physics equations to sink the shot.
But they still make it.
Right. And that's what economists like Milton Friedman would point to. They'd say, look, even if they're not conscious of it, people are still behaving rationally. So what does it matter?
So how did Thaler respond to that?
He basically said, hold on. Economics isn't just about experts making perfectly calculated decisions. It's about everyday people making choices about their lives. Most of us aren't billiards champions, and our decisions are way more complicated than figuring out how to hit a ball.
Right. Plus, I'm guessing most people aren't walking around with spreadsheets in their heads to decide what to buy at the grocery store.
Exactly. And Thaler's point wasn't even that we're totally irrational. It was that we're irrational in ways we can actually study and understand.
Oh, okay, so our irrationality isn't random. It follows patterns.
Right. And that's where the work of psychologists Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky comes in. They actually did experiments to show that these deviations from perfect rationality weren't just flukes, they were consistent and predictable.
That's cool.
It was groundbreaking. They were proving that, no, we're not just random and unpredictable. There's a method to our madness.
Okay, so we've got this predictable irrationality. But does it really matter? I mean, wouldn't people behave rationally when the stakes are high enough? Like if there's a lot of money on the line?
That's a really good question, and it actually goes to the heart of one of the biggest challenges to traditional economics. Let's take a look at a game show called Golden Balls. It really put this idea to the test.
Golden balls. Now, remind me what that one was all about.
Okay, so imagine a British game show. Two contestants are in the final round, and they have a chance to win some serious cash, right?
All right, sounds good so far.
The catch is they have to make a choice. Either they cooperate and split the jackpot, or one of them can betray the other and take all the money for themselves.
Oh, well. Talk about a dilemma. What did people usually do? Did they become greedy monsters when thousands of pounds were on the line?
Actually, no. It might surprise you, but even when there was a ton of money at stake,
Tens of thousands of pounds, even.
a lot of people still chose to cooperate.
Really? So even with that much money at stake, people weren't necessarily acting in a way that traditional economics would have predicted.
Exactly. And you know what? These seemingly small deviations from perfect rationality, they can actually have big impacts on markets and even the whole economy. Let's take extended warranties, for example.
Okay, extended warranties. How do they fit into all of this?
Well, think about it. From a purely rational standpoint, extended warranties often don't make much financial sense, do they?
Yeah, you got a point.
The chance that you'll actually need the warranty is usually pretty low, and the cost of that warranty, it usually outweighs the potential benefit.
Do people still buy them, right? Is it just the fear of their washing machine breaking down and then having to pay a fortune to fix it?
That's definitely part of it, yeah. But Thaler actually argued that it's more profitable for companies to exploit these little irrationalities in our thinking, like selling us overpriced warranties.
Instead of trying to correct them, right?
Exactly. It's a real-world example of how our biases can create inefficiencies in the market.
So companies are basically making money off our tendency to, well, not always be perfectly rational.
You got it. And this all ties into Thaler's challenge to one of the fundamental ideas in traditional economics, the efficient market hypothesis.
Ah, yes, the EMH. That's the idea that markets are super efficient at pricing things, right? So it's basically impossible to consistently beat the market.
Exactly. And the EMH has two main parts. First, no free lunch, which means you can't consistently outperform the market. And second, the price is right, meaning that the price of something, like a stock, always reflects its true value. Thaler didn't really disagree with the no free lunch part.
It's hard to consistently beat the market, right?
Yeah, he actually gave it a pretty good grade. But he definitely took issue with the price is right part. And to illustrate his point, he often uses the example of the CUBA fund.
Oh, yeah, the CUBA fund. What was that all about again?
Well, it was a closed-end fund that, get this, couldn't actually hold any Cuban assets. Most of its holdings were actually U.S. stocks.
Wait, what? So why was it even called the CUBA fund? That seems a little misleading.
You're telling me. And for the most part, it actually traded at a discount compared to the value of the stocks it held. But then, back in December 2014, when President Obama announced plans to improve U.S.-Cuba relations, the price of this CUBA fund shot way up. All of a sudden, it was trading at a premium.
Hold on. So investors piled into a fund that had nothing to do with Cuba just because of its name.
Pretty much. And it's a perfect example of how things like excitement and speculation, those psychological factors, can drive prices away from their real fundamental value. It totally contradicts the idea that prices in the market are always rational.
It seems like the market got swept up in the hype and forgot all about logic.
Exactly. Think about it. If the EMH is right and the price is always right, how do you explain this? Why would a fund with no Cuban assets suddenly skyrocket in value just because of a political announcement?
So this means if we blindly follow the efficient market hypothesis, we might miss these irrational bubbles in the market.
Absolutely. And, even Alan Greenspan, the former Fed chair, admitted after the 2008 housing crisis that maybe he'd put too much faith in the market's ability to regulate itself.
It's like what Thaler calls those supposedly irrelevant factors, right? They might seem irrelevant, but...
It can have a huge impact.
Exactly. And I'm guessing one area where these factors play a big role is in retirement savings.
You're right on money there. Retirement savings is a prime example of how those supposedly irrelevant factors can really influence our decisions.
It makes sense, right? Saving for retirement is tough. Thinking about our future selves decades from now and then having the self-control to save instead of spending money today.
Yeah, it's definitely easier to enjoy yourself now than to worry about saving for something that feels so far away.
Exactly. And Thaler saw this. He recognized that traditional economic models, the ones that assume we're all perfectly rational and have ironclad self-control,
They just don't reflect how people actually behave when it comes to saving money.
So what's the solution? How can we use these behavioral insights to help people make better choices for their future?
That's where the idea of defaults comes in. Thaler was a big advocate for the power of defaults. He found that even tiny changes, like adjusting the default settings in retirement plans, could have a huge impact on how much people save.
Defaults. So like, instead of making people opt in to a retirement savings plan, you just automatically enroll them unless they choose to opt out.
Exactly. It sounds simple, right? But Thaler found that simply switching the default for 401k plans from opt-in to opt-out led to way more people enrolling. And it wasn't just one age group or income level, it worked across the board. It's a perfect example of a nudge, which is a term he made famous. You're gently nudging people towards a better outcome without taking away their freedom of choice.
It's amazing how such a small tweak can make a big difference. I guess people are just more likely to go with the flow, especially if it's already set up for them.
Exactly. It taps into our natural tendency to stick with the status quo. And building on the success of automatic enrollment, Thaler came up with another clever program, Save More Tomorrow.
Save more tomorrow. Okay, that sounds interesting. Tell me more about that one.
Well, this program encourages people to commit to saving more in the future.
Makes sense.
It basically leverages the idea that our future selves, the ones who will actually be retired, are often more rational and forward-thinking than we are in the present.
It's like we're making a deal with our future selves to be more responsible.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And you know what? The research shows that these Save More Tomorrow programs, they actually work. They've been really successful at increasing savings rates, especially for those folks who weren't saving very much to begin with.
That's amazing. So by understanding these subtle factors, those things that traditional economics might have dismissed, Thaler was able to come up with real-world solutions that have helped a lot of people save more for retirement.
That's right. And this approach isn't just for retirement savings. It can be applied to all sorts of economic decisions, even those really complicated ones, like choosing healthcare plans.
Oh man, healthcare plans. Now that's something I could definitely use a little nudge with. There are so many options out there, it's overwhelming.
You and me both. It's a perfect example of what we call choice overload. Sometimes having too many choices can actually make it harder to make a good decision, especially when you throw in our inherent biases. Thaler often talks about this one study with a large company that offered its employees a whopping 48 different healthcare plans. You'd think with all those choices, people would be able to find the absolute best plan for their needs.
That's what traditional economics would say, right?
Yeah,
More choices mean more opportunities to get what you want.
exactly. But what they found was that more than half of the employees ended up picking plans that were, well, kind of a bad deal.
Really? How could that be?
There were actually better plans available, plans that would have cost them less no matter how much healthcare they used.
That's wild. So more choices don't always lead to better decisions.
Not necessarily, no. Sometimes too much choice can make us freeze up and we don't make good decisions. And it gets even more interesting when you look at what happened at the University of Chicago.
Oh, right. Even at a university where you'd expect people to be pretty good at making decisions, most of them were still choosing the suboptimal health plan.
It's true, they had all the information they needed and only a handful of plans to choose from, but still, something like 80% of the employees at the University of Chicago were picking the more expensive, less comprehensive option.
What's going on there? Are we just really bad at making decisions, even when it comes to something as important as our health?
It's not about being bad at decisions. It's about recognizing that we're all influenced by things like status quo bias.
Status quo bias.
That's our tendency to stick with what we know, even if it's not the better option. In this case, the default setting for open enrollment was same as last year. So unless people actively went in and changed their plan, they were automatically re-enrolled in whatever plan they had before, even if a better one was available.
So we just get stuck in a rut. We're busy, we have a lot going on, and changing things, even if it's for the better, takes effort. It's easier to just stick with what we know.
That's exactly it. And that's what makes Thaler's work so important. He's not trying to make us feel bad about our choices. He's just trying to help us understand why we make them. And then how we can design systems that nudge us towards better outcomes. It's not that we're bad decision makers, it's more like we're predictably irrational. And Thaler's work really shines a light on those patterns.
Instead of judging our choices, it's more about understanding them, right?
Exactly. And then using those insights to create systems that help us make better decisions. Kind of like giving ourselves a little nudge in the right direction.
I like that, a nudge. It's like we're all just slightly off kilter.
In a way, yeah. But that's what makes us human, right?
Some true. Okay, so where do we go from here? We've talked about predictable irrationality, those supposedly irrelevant factors. How do we start applying this stuff to real-world problems?
Well, Thaler was really passionate about using these behavioral insights to improve people's lives. And one area where he made a huge impact was in retirement savings.
Retirement savings. Okay, now that's something we can all relate to, right?
Mhm.
Putting away money for the future, something we all know we should do. But it's not always easy.
You got it. It's hard for a lot of reasons.
Yeah, I mean, it's not just about having enough money to save.
It's also about our psychology, trying to picture ourselves decades down the road being disciplined enough to save instead of spending on something we want today.
It's so much easier to just enjoy yourself in the moment, right?
It is, but Thaler recognized that those traditional economic models, the ones that assume we're all perfectly rational and have perfect self-control,
Yeah.
they just don't work. Not when it comes to something like saving for retirement.
They're missing that human element.
Exactly. And so he started thinking, how can we use behavioral economics to help people make better choices for their future selves? How can we make it easier to save? And that's where this idea of defaults came into play.
Defaults. What do you mean by that?
It's actually pretty simple, but super effective. Instead of forcing people to actively choose to enroll in a retirement savings plan.
Which a lot of people probably wouldn't do, right?
Exactly. You just automatically enroll them unless they choose to opt out.
Oh, I see. So it's kind of like flipping the script. Instead of having to take action to save, you have to take action to not save.
You got it. And what Thaler found was that by simply switching the default for 401k plans from opt-in to opt-out, a lot more people ended up enrolled. And this wasn't just limited to certain types of people, it worked across all income levels and age groups.
That's amazing. Such a simple tweak can have a huge impact.
It is. It's all about tapping into that human tendency to go with the flow. You make it the easy, obvious choice, and people are more likely to stick with it. He called it a nudge.
A nudge. I love that.
It's all about guiding people toward a better outcome without limiting their freedom to choose. And then, building on this idea, Thaler came up with another program that was even more clever, Save More Tomorrow.
Okay, save more tomorrow. I'm intrigued. Tell me more about that.
So this one focuses on the idea that our future selves, the ones who will actually be retired one day, they're often more rational and level-headed than we are in the present.
That makes sense. It's like our future selves have got it all figured out.
Exactly. So the Save More Tomorrow program encourages people to commit to saving more in the future. They're essentially making a deal with their future selves to be more responsible with their money.
Oh, I get it. It's like pre-committing to good behavior even before you might be tempted to stray.
Exactly. It's kind of like, future me, I know you'll be wise and make the right decisions, so I'm going to trust you with this extra savings.
That's a pretty cool idea. Did it actually work?
It did. Studies have actually shown that these Save More Tomorrow programs have been really successful at increasing savings rates, and especially for people who weren't saving very much to begin with. It's like giving your future self a helping hand.
So by paying attention to those little things, those psychological factors that traditional economics might overlook, Thaler was able to develop real solutions that have helped people save more for retirement.
That's right. And this approach isn't just limited to retirement savings either. It can be applied to a whole range of economic decisions, even really complex ones, like choosing healthcare plans.
Oh man, healthcare plans. Now, that's something I could definitely use a little behavioral economics help with.
You and me both. It's a classic example of what we call choice overload, right? There are just so many options out there, it can feel impossible to pick the right one.
Totally overwhelming.
And when you throw in all those inherent biases we have, well, it's no wonder people sometimes make choices that aren't in their best interest. Thaler often talks about this study where a large company offered its employees, get this, 48 different healthcare plans. You'd think with that many choices, everyone would be able to find the perfect plan, right?
You'd think so, yeah. More choices should mean more opportunities to find exactly what you need.
That's what traditional economics would say, right? But what they found in this study was kind of shocking. More than half of the employees ended up choosing plans that weren't the best deal for them.
Really? How is that even possible with 48 different plans to choose from?
There were actually better plans available, plans that would have cost them less no matter how much healthcare they used.
That's crazy. So more choices don't always equal better decisions.
Not necessarily, no. Sometimes too many options can make it even harder to choose. We get overwhelmed, we freeze up, and we end up making decisions we might later regret.
That makes sense. I've definitely felt that way before, like when I'm trying to pick a movie on Netflix and there are just too many options. Okay, so what about the other half of the employees in that study? Did they manage to find the best plan?
It's interesting, right? Because you'd think that with all the smart people working at this company, they'd be able to figure out the best healthcare plan for themselves. But even at the University of Chicago.
A university full of brilliant minds.
Exactly. Even there, most people were still choosing a health plan that wasn't the best option.
We're kidding. So even really smart people can fall prey to these irrational choices.
Well, it's not about intelligence, really. It's about recognizing that we all have these built-in biases that can influence our decision-making, even when we think we're being completely rational. It really comes down to this idea of status quo bias. That's our tendency to stick with what we know, even if there's a better option out there.
So even smart people fall into that trap. It's like we're all creatures of habit.
We are. And in the case of the University of Chicago, their default setting during open enrollment was same as last year. So unless people went out of their way to change their plan, they just automatically got re-enrolled in whatever they had before.
Even if it wasn't the best choice for them anymore. Yeah.
Exactly. And that's a perfect example of how those little things, those seemingly insignificant details, can have a big impact on our choices.
It's like we're all running around on autopilot sometimes, not even realizing it.
That's a good way to put it. And that's really the beauty of Thaler's work. He's showing us these patterns, these quirks in our decision-making, not to shame us, but to help us understand ourselves better.
So we can make more deliberate, more informed choices, right?
Exactly. It's like once you see those biases, you can start to account for them. You can nudge yourself in the right direction, so to speak.
I like that. It's like we're all in this together, figuring out how to navigate the world with all our imperfections.
We are. And that's what makes behavioral economics so fascinating. It's a reminder that we're not those perfectly rational beings that traditional economics always assumed we were.
And you know what? I think that's a good thing. Because once we acknowledge that we're all A little bit irrational, a little bit predictable in our quirks,
Then we can start to design systems and policies that actually work for real people.
instead of those imaginary econs.
Exactly. So, to wrap things up today, I want to leave you with this thought. Think about a decision you made recently. Maybe it was a big one, maybe it was something small. Did you just go with the default option? Even though there might have been a better choice, did you overestimate your ability to resist that extra cookie?
Been there.
We all have. But by understanding these little behavioral patterns in ourselves, we can start to make more mindful choices, choices that are truly in our best interest.
It's like knowing is half the battle.
It really is. And if you're interested in learning more about this stuff, I highly recommend checking out Richard Thaler's books, Nudge and Misbehaving. They're both super insightful and engaging reads.
I'll definitely have to check those out. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of behavioral economics. Until next time.